Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joining us from across the country today for the third webinar in the Park Perspective series. I'm Deanna Bowlby, and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. I'm just going to give you a few notes on the technical side of things. If you have any questions for me or for the panelists, during the session, we'll be using the chat function, which appears on the taskbar at the bottom of your Zoom window. There you'll notice that the option of sending a chat to all panelists and attendees is there. Please feel free to use this. At any point during the webinar, we really encourage you to ask questions. In the taskbar, there's also a raised hand feature as well, and we'll be using this during the webinar. Today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Park People's website for future reference, and we will send it to you in an email as well. To start things off, I would like to see who's participating in the webinar. Please use the chat window and let us know who you are and where you're joining us from. Oh, we've got someone from Montreal, Stu. And we have people from London and Kawartha Lakes and Toronto and Guelph and Vancouver and Edmonton, Burlington, Kelowna, Winnipeg, from Scarborough, from Vancouver, from South Africa. Welcome. This is great. From Hamilton. Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us today. So Park People is hosting this webinar, and we're an organization that supports people to help them activate the power of parks and improve the quality of life in cities across Canada. Because we feel that when communities get involved, parks get better. Today, 86% of Canadians live in cities. This rapid densification is set to continue. The potential of parks to offset many of the challenges of urban life makes parks more relevant today, even more so than before. Parks are the places where we gather to play, to exercise, to relax, and to connect with each other and with nature. You can really feel the energy of a vibrant park, and it reverberates across a whole neighborhood. You can really see and measure the benefits of a vibrant park system on an entire city's health, economy, ecology, and social well-being. This is the power of parks, and it's created by people like yourselves who are committed to making real and lasting difference in communities and cities. Today, we're going to take a close look at the Assiniboine Park Conservancy. It is a unique model of park governance of the Assiniboine Park, which is a jewel in the Winnipeg park system. And what do we mean when we say park governance? City parks have long been managed and governed by public agencies, but now new partnership models have been emerging where we're seeing different ways of structuring governance of parks. Governance focuses more on the process of decision-making and how these decisions are implemented. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists today, Karen Pierce, Director of Grounds and Horticulture at the Assiniboine Park Conservancy. What we'll cover today will be looking into key elements in the mandate of the Assiniboine Park Conservancy. The mandate is to lead, to manage, to fundraise, to restore, and redevelop the Assiniboine Park and its amenities. So I'm very pleased to introduce you to Karen.
Hello, thank you so much. And thank you to Park People for putting on these types of webinars. I find them really interesting myself. To those of you out there, welcome, and thank you so much for coming. How many of you have been to Assiniboine Park? I don't see hands. Do you see hands? Oh, hello. Yay! So quite a few, or a few of you have been here, which is awesome. Assiniboine Park is quite an interesting space. It's around 400 acres. It used to be on the very western edge of Winnipeg, and the town founders or the city founders had a really great vision to say, we know that we're going to need to have green space, and we want to have green space that people can use for a long time. So in around 1904, the city of Winnipeg invited Frederick Todd, who was a student of Olmsted, to design a city park. And so the whole concept of the park here has these wide open spaces, but then little rooms. The park itself is holds one of the oldest zoos in Winnipeg, and is certainly a point of pride for Winnipeggers and, well, I think for everybody, but that's okay. So in 2008, Assiniboine Park was kind of at its lowest spot. The city was fairly large, obviously, and park systems, as I'm sure most of you know, become very heavy on the taxpayers. And so this had got to the point where the park was very deteriorated, and starting to get overrun with vandalism. The park amenities were down to the point where 95% of the facilities were in poor to worse than poor condition. And adding to that was also the zoo itself was about to lose its accreditation. And so a group of really visionary people got together and said, let's look at this and do a conservancy and create a conservancy. So in 2008, a private-public partnership became a not-for-profit, and it's a charitable organization. So originally there was 3 different organizations that were running the park, or 4. There was the City of Winnipeg, there was the Friends of the Park, the Friends of the Conservancy or Conservatory, the the partners in the park, which looked after the Lyric Theatre itself, and then there was a zoological society. So Assiniboine Park Conservancy took those 3 different not-for-profit organizations and pulled them all together to create the APC. So we were responsible for the mandate to look after the park, to look at redeveloping the park. And to do that, we came up with a $200 million campaign called Imagine a Place. And the $200 million campaign took into consideration 3 main key parts of the park. The first one was the duck pond, which is the second one is the Children's Family, or the Stuber Family Children's Garden, which also includes a nature playground, and that was phase 2. That's the heart of the park. And that second heart of the park was redoing the duck pond and creating a space where people could skate. We put in a restaurant. We took the children's garden from what you saw earlier, which was just swings, and created a really immersive, interactive space for children to play in nature. And the third phase of that, or second phase of that program of the $200 million campaign, was the Journey to Churchill. And this was taking, this is one of our frogs in our playground. The playground is really interesting because kids, we thought for sure they were going to come in and get all excited about the big play structures that we recreated, but they come in and they kind of lose it on the plants, and they spend more time running around the forest and sniffing things, which is really fun. And these are our frogs, which are made out of plants, which is just really fun too. Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. So the Journey to Churchill is taking 17 acres of the Assiniboine Park Zoo, and 14 acres of this. The zoo itself is 80 acres, and 14 acres were turned into Journey to Churchill. The major part of that is for polar bears and other northern species. The third phase of this of the Conservancy's project of the $200 million campaign is called Canada's Diversity Gardens. And Canada's Diversity Gardens is a corner of the park. Sorry, this is Journey to Churchill. Bear with us, folks. This is my very first webinar. These ladies are professional. I am not. So the interesting thing on the left-hand side there, you can see there is a seal and a polar bear and a child. And the coolest part about this is you can have all these species. The polar bear and the seal can smell each other and see each other. The polar bears have 10 acres of land to roam around. They're totally happy polar bears. And the seals have seals from BC, for the most part, who can't be released into the wild. And the kids absolutely adore being that close to these things. And that's the whole idea, is to bring people close to nature and engage them, and engage all of their senses. So the third phase of our $200 million campaign is Canada's Diversity Gardens. And I have, again, I'm not a professional, and this is a blurry picture, but it's the best I could come up with at the moment. It is taking a corner of the park, taking our old conservatory down, and creating a space that we're calling the Leaf. We didn't want it to be a shrine to plants. We didn't want it to be sort of a, shh, you need to know Latin to come in here. We wanted to really celebrate community and celebrate the diversity in our community, not just the diversity in our biological communities in regards to botanicals and things like that, but how do people work with plants and how does plants engage in their lives? Because it's not just in that sort of formal idea where you go in and see whatever kind of tree, that whatever kind of tree could be in the forest and within the park as well. So it takes up three kind of main zones. One is an Indigenous Peoples Garden, which speaks to how the Indigenous people, Assiniboine Park is on Treaty 1 land. And so it speaks to the people that were here first and how they handled the landscape and the types of foods that they found within their plants. The main portion of it is called the Leaf, which is the replacement of the conservatory. This has an event space in it. It has biomes, a subtropical biome, a Mediterranean biome, an area for weddings, a butterfly garden that's up on the 3rd floor, and a display house as well. In front of that is kitchen gardens, which will again teach people or help people kind of make that connection with where their food comes from, and stop some of that plant blindness of we eat carrots, but if you only get the carrots that are in the bag, you know, they're teeny tiny, you don't know what the top of a carrot might look like. So there will be a teaching garden as part of that. And then a sensory garden, a performance garden, and a garden that's very seasonally changing. The other part that's really neat about this project is a place called The Grove, where we are going to create forests in and around the area, but really celebrate all of the different plant breeders that came from all over the place, and the trees that they developed and how they developed them, and how those connections of their people, like why did they come to Winnipeg or Manitoba, and why did they stay, and what difference did that make in the landscape. And some of these are native plants that have been developed, and some of them are we'll be showcasing plant material that we need to use to replace some of the plant material that we're losing due to Dutch elm disease. Are there any questions? Because I need to breathe.
I actually have a question for you, Karen,
Sure.
Which is, I think it might actually lead well into your next section, but do you have a lease with the city?
Yes, we do. We have a 50-year lease with the city. The city owns the property and the assets, and it's our responsibility to develop and build and grow those. So we receive funds from the city of Winnipeg for the maintenance of the amenities. This is money that the city would have already spent on the park. This money, they also give us a portion of money for capital projects. And as we develop as a park, we're not for profit, but we want to be self-sustainable or as close to as possible. So the money the city gives us diminishes over the years, and Assiniboine Park Conservancy is intended to be able to pay its own way at some point. So we are governed by a board of directors. We have 11 people on our board of directors. They are business people. They represent different groups within the city and the province, and then we also have one counselor that's also on this. Our governance structure is, or our board is a governance structure. So within the board are a couple of different committees that look after finance and that kind of thing. But the Assiniboine Park Conservancy itself, the people who work here, are the ones who the mandate is given to us by the city, covered by the board, and then it's up to us to figure out how to make sure we make that happen. And we do that through a variety of different things. The leadership and the guidance of our board, we are really, really fortunate to have an incredible board who are really supportive and very gracious with their time and their experience. And then the connection that our next steps of this is to look at how do we do this? How do we take a park that everyone loves, and it is an incredible, incredible space? I'm not from here, so it became very apparent very quickly how this is a touchstone for the community. And so we had to look at what do we do, and how do we do what we do, and how are we going to fix it? And one of the things we looked at was looking at our strategic plan and look at the sort of the $200 campaign, but then how are we going to manage this long term? And one of the things that was really key was ensuring that we have within our strategic plan people, because we're not just responsible to the people of Winnipeg or the people of Manitoba or to our board or that kind of thing, but we're responsible to the people who actually work and volunteer within the park as well. Any questions?
That's good. I have another question for you.
Okay.
How much do you spend to maintain the park, and do you have to pay to enter or use the park?
Right. Entrance to the park is free. There is a fee to get into the zoo, but you can buy a membership. Our overall budget for roughly 400 acre park, including the zoo, restaurants, we have a cricket pitch, we have sports fields, we have a sculpture garden, we have an art gallery. We're about to build a new conservatory, or a LEAF. Is about $25 million. Overall, we employ at the height of our season just under 450 people, and other seasons around 300. So that's roughly our budget. So one of the key lines, one of the key things to I think from a good conservancy is really having open lines of communication. And it's really key to have trust. So when we first started, APC had to get the people of the city to trust us, and we had to also have the city council, as well as our volunteers and our donors, trust that we were going to do what we said we were going to do and do it properly. So one of the things that we did initially is I wanted to naturalize the edges of the park for a variety of different reasons, from an environmental perspective, from a way to bring more biodiversity within the park. And so I left the edges of the park non-mowed. So we had no mow, low mow, and mown areas. And when we did this, it became a bit of a hoopla, and it was not taken very well, to the point where we had to go and cut all the grass and start all over again, which was totally fair because we hadn't proved, APC hadn't, and I personally hadn't told anyone what we were doing. So we had to get into this situation where we could say, this is why we're doing this, and this is what we're doing, and that we are going to manage it properly. And in that case, we now have about 7 or 8 spots within the park that are almost 70% totally naturalized with the material that would have been here beforehand, which is good for the songbirds that travel through, for the insects, as well as just is kind of pretty in its own perspective. The other thing that happened is the city of Winnipeg discovered emerald ash borer. And emerald ash borer, we work very closely with the city with Dutch elm disease. We have a very large collection of some beautiful elms, and within the city of Winnipeg, I think we have the best collection in North America. And the Assiniboine Park also has a ton of elms. Problem being that they're all one species, and so when they get affected by a disease, you have to deal with that. So when the city found emerald ash borer, we called them up and said, to the forestry department, and said, what are you going to do? What is the process the city is going to do to deal with emerald ash borer? Because we want to follow along the same thing, because we're not our own independent little island. We are a part of the city, and this park is very important, and our urban forest and urban canopy is very important as well. When the city we look after our own Dutch elm disease, so the city will come in and we talk about which trees have to come down, and then we will, in order to free up their time to look at other parks, we have a forestry department that can take care of the elms within our own park. And so that combination of having the open communication, but also being able to have the ability to say what are our best practices going to be, where do we want to be 5 years from now, as not just as our park, but parks as a whole within the entire community. How are we going to move this forward, and what are the best practices?
Thanks, Karen. I have some more questions for you.
See that.
And people are using the question. Keep putting your questions in the chat window. This is great. So one of the questions that we have was, where does the revenue come from? Private, philanthropy, or corporate? Mm-hmm. Again, government.
Yeah, so we do for the park as a whole. We have all of those options. We have money that we bring in ourselves through memberships and through our restaurants, through rental of the spaces. We have an incredible donation base of patrons of the park and people who have donated to the park itself. We get some funding from the city, as I said, and then on some of the larger projects, we get some funding from the province and the federal government. And because we're not for profit, we can also partner with other organizations. So we have had some great grants from TD, and I shouldn't probably out of which ones, sorry, but we get grants from other organizations because we can partner. Whereas a city as a whole, most cities can't do that. And that's one of the beauties of having a conservancy, is it allows us to be able to partner with other organizations to do things that we may not have been able to afford to otherwise.
Great. I have another question, which is about, when was the strategic plan completed?
So we've done so I've been with the Conservancy almost 11 years, and we did the first one the first year I was there. It moves all the time. It's a moving target. We look at it every year. Every 2 years we sort of look at it really closely, but it is on every wall and throughout the entire organization. Everything we do looks at what's our strategy, how does it fit into the business plan, how do we get to where we want to go. And it's kind of like a roadmap where if I said I'm going to drive to Toronto, and then I'm going to drive to Toronto and I'm leaving on Tuesday, and I'm going to drive through Thunder Bay, and I'm going, so you kind of have those maps, and then somewhere along the line I go, oh, I'm in Dryden. Is it on the way to Thunder Bay? Those kinds of things. So it kind of gives you the ability to check in. Where are we going? Are we getting there? Are we moving in the right direction? Does this still fit with what we did? And the strategy plan, like I said, the first couple of them, we talked a lot about the importance of being stewards of the park. So the history of the park, the access for people in the park, the animals that we look after in the zoo, the trees in the park, that was really very vital. And after about 2, I think, versions of the strategic plan, it hasn't changed a ton, just some of the wording changed. And one of the things that became very apparent to us was, as I said, was this idea that people are part of this plan, and people need to be part of a plan, in particular in a park. Dan, you said when you started, that people, the parks are really vital to the I don't know, the life of a city. They're very vital to people. They're a place you walk through, you fall in love, you fall out of love, you celebrate, you mourn, you just travel through, you catch your breath, whatever it might be. And so the strategic plan has to marry that and say, what does this park mean? Because it's almost its own being. And so it's part of the city, but it's also, we're just stewards of it. And so the strategic plan gets looked at, as I said, every couple of years. For me, it's a daily thing to look at and say, does this fit our business model? Should we be doing this? Does that answer your question?
I have one more question, and then I have many questions. I'll do one more. Okay. What percentage of your operating fund comes from the city?
I should know that off the top of my head, but I don't. When we started, I believe it was around 50%, and it's gone down since we started. So it breaks down. I can, if you'd like, I can send you the numbers later, and you can send that out. Yeah. Yeah,
that sounds great.
Yeah, but yeah. So, and that's interesting because to transition to a conservancy, we do have unionized staff, and I have a number here somewhere. So as I said, we hire. So we have approximately 97 full-time unionized staff, and when we started, the unionized staff was in the zoo and the conservatory and the gardeners. And so when the transition to become a conservancy happened, we went to the city employees that were here and said, how many of you would like to stay with the Assiniboine Park Conservancy, and how many of you would like to go back to the city and stay with the city? About 95% stayed with the Assiniboine Park Conservancy. The unionized staff were with QP 500, and so we did a collective agreement with QP 500 that's slightly different than the City of Winnipeg, which allowed us a little bit of flexibility in regards to how we combine union and non-unionized staff as well as volunteers. So it's a little bit of a different model. Long term, we had to adjust to some different ways of doing things. So this picture shows you us creating a floating island. We have a big duck pond, and we want to minimize chemicals as best we can. So we've been working with this duck pond. It's fairly shallow, so people don't, hurt themselves in it. And this particular day, we had union, non-union volunteers, and my staff here. And as you can see, it was raining. It was also duck season, so there was baby ducklings everywhere. And 90% of this job was not just to get the floating island into the lake, but to herd ducklings, which was quite fun. And the nice thing about it was no one in this group was least bit concerned that the person standing next to them, they were all part of the park. And that was really the key. Let's get to that point was the first phase of really them trusting, no different than the city trusting the Conservancy, is the staff trusting the volunteers and the union versus non-union. And it's really, we're all here for the park. So that was a really fun day, but it's also really important to get to that place. The other part of the transitioning to a conservancy model was looking at our finances and saying how can we sort of the more money we can save, the more operationally efficient we can be, the less money we have to ask for, which means that more money can go back to the other parks in the city, but also allows us to really look at running a sound business. And running a sound business looks at how do we ensure that we have an awesome, amazing experience for the people who come to the park, but we need to be fiscally responsible for that. And so some of that was changing the way we do things. And so we minimized in some places, we changed how many annuals we use, or we changed the way we cut the grass, or some of the things in the zoo was we combined exhibits. So you've got, more interaction between the animals and that kind of thing. So it was interesting transition. It does take time. It does take trust. And I think in our particular model, it really was staying true to that initial mandate. The city said, this is what you shall do. Our board said, this is what you shall do, and this is what we shall do. And it's not because we, it's the right thing to do. And it's the right thing to ensure that the people who had the vision in 1904, if they did their job right, then if in 2000 or 3002, if I do my job, and meaning the park, if we do our jobs right, then we will have done the right thing too, and make sure this park is still here for the future.
I have another question for you before you keep going.
Okay.
So what, if any, are the tensions between the municipally run parks and your conservancy? And does it ever feel as though you're doing the work that the government should be managing?
I think when we first started, there was definitely tension between the city park departments and the Conservancy. But I think, as I said, we've learned to trust each other. We had a big log jam last year that was was in the middle of the footbridge. The Assiniboine River obviously runs past the park. And so the city called us and said, we need some help. And we said, sure. Well, so we worked in collaboration. So I don't think there's so much of that. As far as, what was the second part of the question?
Does it ever feel as though you're doing the work the government should be managing?
I'm going to answer this from my personal perspective. I don't think so. I think that, my job is to work with the Conservancy and the people that matter to make this place the most incredible place. And I say matter, I mean everyone that comes to the park and has the opportunity to come to the park matters. But when I look at sort of what budgets cities and provinces and municipalities have, a park is a bit of a frill. If you need to have proper roads to get people around, or fire departments, or I think that's where the city money should go to. But people need parks, and so there's that great kind of, what do you do with that? And I think that's one of the beauties of having a conservancy, or having a conservancy model, is to be able to combine those and say, well, we're going to free up some of your money because we can look after this so that people can enjoy this as part of their living experience within this community. But you can put the money that's very short on the things that really, really matter to health and well-being from a I don't know, almost an Armageddon kind of perspective. I mean, if you only have $100 and you have to buy all of these things with it, then a park should probably, as important as they are, should probably be lower on the list. And so I don't think we're doing the government's job. I think we're doing a very important job, and I think there should be that partnership. That's just me. Tough questions. Tough group.
I have one more question for you, and this is from our international guest. And that is the park open at night? Mm-hmm. And do you have vandalism in the park?
Yes and yes. So yes, the park is open at night. And someone asked earlier if the park is free. Yes, the park is free. The pavilion's free. The art gallery's free. The zoo is really the only place that you pay, or if you want to rent, you can have a picnic in the park, and it's free. If you want to ensure that you have that space, then there's a nominal fee for that. The park is not closed. We do have park security. And we do have a security that is in the park 24/7. Do we get vandalism? Yes. And usually it depends. It sort of tends to roll around when the kids first go back to school and when they first come out of school, when they're not quite as busy with the rest of their lives, and it comes in waves. It is, I think, important that a park is safe. And I think as long as people feel safe, then people don't want to vandalize it. we spend a lot of time. We have 2 volunteers that this is their choice, but their entire days are spent in the park just picking up garbage. And I think if people see a clean, well-maintained space, they don't feel like it's okay to damage it or just leave garbage somewhere. So yeah, it's open. It is a bit of a challenge, definitely. But we don't have as many problems as we used to before we had security in the park. And they're not there to be policed by any means. They're not policing the park. They're really just eyes to make sure that people are keeping each other safe. So I'm going to move on. Can I do that?
You can.
Again, this is my first time doing this. So we have about 300 volunteers in the park, and the 2 gentlemen I talked about are fabulous, and they have chosen, this is their choice. Our volunteers go anywhere from 14 to 85 years old. We have just over 300 of them. They do anything and everything. They will support with face paintings. We have a program called Wildest Dreams, where we bring in kids from kind of similar to Make-A-Wish Foundation kind of idea, where kids come to the zoo for free and have a really amazing experience. They've gone so far as building hoses for our gibbons, so they get into looking after some of the exhibit design and helping us with that. They help with supporting of, they make puppies. They just, they're amazing. They're amazing volunteers, good ambassadors, and we couldn't do it without them. We have interpreters that work within the zoo as well. They engage with all of the different groups that come through, the children's groups. And then we have master gardeners who volunteer in the English garden. And they are more of an ambassador situation in that space, but we do have 2 gardens within the zoo that are run by volunteers, and it's really important that we give that opportunity to give back. We have we have some staff that retired and come back and volunteer. We have a lot of kids that this is their first job experience. They get an opportunity to commit to coming somewhere and doing something and learning how to work with other people, and volunteerism is really important. Our staff themselves volunteer for different things that we do as well. So we're really fortunate. We have a really good volunteer organizer. But I think that the idea of a park should be for everyone of all abilities, and that is really important. So they're super important to what we're doing.
I have a very interesting question about volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
So using volunteers, especially young, because you mentioned 14,
Mm-hmm.
how do you manage your liability exposure,
Mm-hmm.
Insurance policy?
So our volunteer program is based on San Diego, or loosely based on San Diego Zoo, which has a really involved, there's an application people have to go through. If you're working with kids, you have to go through all of our volunteers have gone through a criminal record check. There's educational and instructional perspectives, and then there's training. And so no one's just sent into the park to say just go. It's very much like having a job. We have a health and safety program that's for the volunteers as well. They're given uniforms, they have radios, they have access to all the same things our staff does.
Great, thanks. I have another question for you. It's not related to volunteers, but it's about how you deal with snow clearing. Do you sand or salt the pathways?
Okay, so snow clearing has been probably the most fun. When we took over the park the first year, we did not have full access to. We were not responsible for the pathways or the grass. We were building and setting up and going through that first kind of strategic planning and sort of getting our feet on the ground. Second year, we hired a grounds department, and part of that department kind of determined I didn't really want people that could just push snow. I wanted them to be able to be turf managers. So I hired golf course superintendents, because really the management of the ecosystem was really what I was concerned about. But I told them to go to a certain path, and sweep said path, but they all started in January and they didn't know where the path was, which was kind of funny. But what we do is we broom them. We have bobcats and tool cats. We have a big blower that we use to blow leaves. We'll blow, if it's a light snow, we'll just blow it off. If it's a heavier snow, we use the brooms, and if it's really heavy, then of course we scrape it. We use beet juice, which is environmentally friendly, but it turns everything kind of a yucky color of red. And then we also use a material called Isomax. And ISOMEX is what they use on the runways, and it's basically an iron, so it doesn't hurt the landscape as much. We do get a lot of salt damage from people driving on the city roads and then driving into the park, and then it kind of sprays off, but we try and keep it as environmentally friendly as possible. One of the ways we do that is we have 2 shifts. So they start at 6 o'clock in the morning. They'll kind of open up the park, and then the second shift comes in the afternoon and gets, because in Winnipeg, for those of you who've been here, or anyone who's Prairie Lake, is the wind will come from one direction one part of the day, another direction the other part of the day. So ice is probably a little bit trickier, because we do have areas where you'll get some, lots of traffic, and it sort of warms things up. But the way we deal with it, to the most of our, we try and keep the pathways, the main pathways, down to bare pavement all year, so that people can jog and walk, and strollers and people with wheelchairs or walkers can access the places they need to go.
Thank you, Karen.
You're
I
welcome.
have more questions for you, but I'm going to save them until you do your next section.
Okay. I feel like I have to do my homework now. So we're a not-for-profit organization, but we're very entrepreneurial. And the whole point of that is because we want to sort of make sure that the money that we're saving by not asking the city for it is going back to the city. And so what we've done, which is slightly different than the New York Conservancy, is that we have our funding model is very entrepreneurial, but we have our own restaurants. And so all of the money that we make in the restaurants comes back to the park. All of the money that we make from rentals also comes back to the park. And so we have rental fees for the fields. We have ongoing fundraising. We have 3 restaurants that we rent out for weddings, for events, for conferences. All of the money that comes back from that comes to us, and so that gives us the ability to actually put some money back into the park. We also have a membership program at the zoo that allows us to be able to take from that, and then there's retail outlets within the zoo as well. And then that perspective of admission fees is always kind of tricky, because we don't charge to go into the gardens. We don't charge to come in and just walk through the parks or that kind of thing. But we do. There is a cost, obviously, whether people come to the zoo or not. The animals still need to be fed, and so this funding model is working well. It is very fee based in regards to memberships, and so we have to kind of look at where can we cut our costs and how do we get more people to come to the park and spend money. People don't always think about going to a park and spending money. So that's a little bit different, but we don't charge to come in or charge for parking or anything like that. And what we do is we also have this capacity to allow rentals. So this is one of the many functions that happens on the Lyric Lawn. Over $10 million a year is raised in the park for other charities, and so our fee for people to rent this space is helps us be able to repair the space after 10,000 people have walked on it, in particular if it's raining. But that also allows other people to raise money. There's tons of runs in the park. There's things of that nature, and then we also have project or a program in the summertime called a jazz or summer entertainment series. And so the summer entertainment series takes place on the Lyric Lawn, but also in the gardens. And this allows people to be able to watch music for free. The next slide. Yeah, that's Jazz and Leo. So this is, people can come and just walk in, and every Sunday there's the free music in the park that helps activate the park, and that also helps with the ability of people, if more people are in the park, the less damage you're going to have, and that kind of thing as well. And then also during the summer we have a summer entertainment series includes in the month of August we do movies on the Lyric Lawn, and so this is Lyric Lawn during movie night. But we also have ballet in the park. We have Canada Day at this space. We have lots of events that Assiniboine Park puts on for the general public, and it's not intended to be a cost to someone. This is all free. We do get sponsors for that though, and that's something that the city may or may not be able to. Most cities may or may not be able to do, is to get sponsors involved, and putting names on things to allow us to be able to do that. And then part of that same is a park share, and park share is an endowment that allows us to bring students to the park, to do some outreach into places where people that may not be able to physically or financially afford to come to the park, that we can bring the park to them, or we can bring them to the park. And that's really important to, it is an entrepreneurial spirit, but it is is a park, and we have to be very conscious of that is for everyone, and we want to make sure it's free and accessible to as many people as want to come.
I have a few questions for you.
I see that.
So what do you put on any of your own events to raise money, and are your facilities open year-round, including the zoo?
Yes, the zoo is open year-round, and our facilities are open throughout the winter. The English garden, we leave it to just a couple of paths, so it's not, that's one of the spaces we don't take it right down to bare pavement. If you're going to walk in there, it's very beautiful in the winter, but it's sort of as if you're walking in a park, like on the grass. We do a couple of different fundraisers throughout the year. We have a garden party in the English and Leo Mall Sculpture Garden, where we fundraise and sell tickets to it, and have a big gala kind of evening. We do smaller fundraisers. We have internal fundraisers from our staff, where we have a social group that gets together and they do trivia night and things like that go towards Red Panda Day or Snow Leopard Day. So yeah. And then as far as the city, for the community, as I said, we at the movies, it's free for the people. There's probably 2 or 3 volunteers in that group walking around, with something about memberships or that kind of thing. So it's not a big hard sell of, hey, come to the park for free and then we're going to ask you for money. But if you want to donate, you're more than welcome.
Great. I have another question. Do you think the general public is aware that the park is run by a conservancy?
I think it's about half and half. We still there's a lot of people who do understand it's a conservancy. Because we had a conservatory, there's still a lot of people that think the Assiniboine Park Conservatory is running the park. And then there's a lot of people that do understand it's a conservancy. That is about it's about awareness, and I think that goes back to the idea that the amount of money that we bring into the park to be able to lessen the amount that's being asked for by the city, there is still city tax paying money going into the park, and we have to be very aware of that too. So I think in Winnipeg, a lot of people know a lot more than they did a few years ago. I don't know if the general public that's visiting the city of Winnipeg would necessarily know that.
Okay. I have a question for you around the Vancouver Aquarium within Stanley Park. Has been protested many times and has had to spend a lot of money fighting lawsuits for having large mammals in captivity. Has your zoo experienced any of this?
Well, the largest animals in our zoo are the polar bears. None of our polar bears were bred in captivity. All of the bears that we have are owned by Manitoba Conservation. They are here because they were abandoned and had no chance of life, or they were nuisance bears that were going to be shot. A lot of the other animals that we have within the zoo are animals that came from different situations. We have a cougar that was someone had kept as a pet, and so obviously you can't release that animal into the wild. Zoos are contentious in a lot of different reasons. I think the key part to zoos is understanding animal welfare, and this is the biggest part of what we do in the zoo is look at the animal welfare. What is that animal's requirement for space? How is it being enriched? How is it living its life? As an example, we have a bear named Storm. Storm was up in Churchill, and Storm, if any of you recall the story, he attacked somebody. And so he actually bit the person, and so he'd been in polar bear jail a few times. And so Storm came to us because otherwise he would be dead. And the Polar Bear Research Center that Storm lives in also has a research capacity to it, where we have a conservation research group is looking at things like, you can tell the difference of polar bears very much like they do orca by the different patterns on their orcas. They do patterns on their dorsal fins. For polar bears, it's whiskers on their cheeks. And so the researchers can now go up north and look at the wild polar bears by learning to study the bears that we have here. So I think it really conservation and research is a big part of what we do in the zoo. It's a really big part of ensuring that we have a burrowing owl program, where we are breeding burrowing owls and releasing them to the public. And this summer, very exciting, we released a small butterfly called a skipperling. It's a very tiny little butterfly. this for the short and tall grass prairie. There's only 70 of them found in the wild in the past, and so we did 2 years of working with growing a different species to make sure that we knew how to grow these butterflies properly. And last year we released 7 adult butterflies into the wild. That's key. That's really what zoos should be. And is that, you know, with the animals that are in your care, you need to take really good care of them, and then you need to look after the habitats that they come from, and do what you can to educate people on the plight of the landscape. And the landscape is not just the landscape that's performed, but it's the ecosystems that we live within.
Thank you,
Does that answer your
Karen.
question?
Yeah. I have another question for you,
Sure.
a little bit different. Can you describe the surrounding community? Is it downtown or more suburban? And do you have different approaches to the citywide community versus the local community?
So we are in the west end of Winnipeg. Winnipeg used to be a variety of small towns, and I'm not from here, so I don't know the history exactly, but all of these small towns conglomerated to make the city of Winnipeg. So Assiniboine Park would have been on the very west end of Winnipeg at one point. It is about a 10-minute drive from downtown. We're just off Portage Avenue on the riverside, so you can get here by bus. We're fairly close to a bus on the other side, on the south side of the park as well. How do we affect with the city? And I think we have a lot of locals that live around here. There's no question, to walk their dogs. The gardeners in the English garden know all of the dogs by name. They don't know the people's name, but they know that's Stanley, or that's Fred, or that's, you know, Fifi. So we have a lot of locals. We have a lot of tourists that come through. And we also do a lot of outreach. There's a lot of schools that come. We have a new education classroom in the zoo where schools come, and they actually use the classroom for a month, where the classroom is in the zoo, but that's their school base. So they do all of their school work in that space. So I don't know off the top of my head. We probably have stats somewhere that tell us how many people come from where. I could look that up, but I don't know off the top of my head. Our intent is certainly to engage with the entire community. And when we had the Tragically Hip, when Gord Downey decided, announced that he was not going to play anymore in his last show, we played Tragically Hip on the Lyric Lawn, and there was people coming from not just the community, but outside of the community, and that happens a lot. There's people that drive in, spend the day in Winnipeg shopping, stay from Brandon or whatever small town around here. Brandon's not a small town, for those of you from Manitoba, but you know, from smaller towns and smaller communities, they'll come in and shop and then spend the afternoon or the evening in the park and then go home. So I think we reach a broad audience, and we certainly want to. That's our intent. It shouldn't be an exclusive. No park should be exclusive.
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
This is going to shock you, but I have no more questions for you right
Yay!
now. So.
Okay. All right then. Okay, so you had takeaways for me. Oh, there we go. Okay, so the key takeaways are our mandate is to lead, manage, fundraise, restore, and redevelop the Assiniboine Park and its amenities. That was developed in conjunction with the city. And so it's kind of key as far as the Conservancy and the Conservancy model is concerned, to make sure that you have that open communication with the two. We have a 50-year lease with the city, who still owns the property and the assets. We work independently from the city. And our not-for-profit status allows us to be able to pursue funds and partner with other organizations in order to help develop different things that are going on within the park. And these funding sources may not have been available to just the city of Winnipeg. Our revenue sources include 3 restaurants, rental fees, admission for certain park activities, and ongoing fundraising activities. And the key approach to our governance model is the involvement of volunteers, and the involvement and the building of trust between our staff and our volunteers and us in the city. And that aspect of, I think, the key to a good conservancy is having a really strong plan, checking on your plan regularly, and making sure that you have trust of the people that you're working with and for. Do I need to improvise now?
So we do, it's our question time.
Okay.
You have some more questions for you. So one of the questions is, do you allow private events to have alcohol served?
If they're within areas that are licensed, yes.
Okay. And my next question for you is, do your unionized staff actually work for the Conservancy? Are their wages on par with city staff benefits?
Yep. Yes, our unionized staff work for Assiniboine Park Conservancy, and our union agreement is very similar to the city union agreement. The difference in it is that we have a couple of different job classifications that the city didn't have. So other than that, yeah, they're on par with the city union staff.
That's great. Any more questions? Oh, wait, I do have another one. What's your annual operating budget?
For the park as a whole?
Yes.
Yeah, it's between $25 and $30 million.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I think we're, wait a minute. Oh, the response was wow.
It's very much a small city. We have a zoo, which has a filtration plant. It's not to clean water for people; it's to clean water for polar bears. So but it runs the same as a large filtration plant. We have I think we have somewhere in the area of 20 kilometers worth of roads within a 400-acre space. We have lights, infrastructures, our light poles, anything underground that was here before is still the city's responsibility, and that's why we have an amenities program with them. But anything that we have built is our responsibility. So we have an art gallery. We have approximately, I'm looking at my map, we have about 70 to 80 buildings within the park. So yeah, it's a big number. It's a big park.
Another question for you, which is, what kind of sponsorship opportunities do you offer?
Oh, that's a real question. So we have anything from just a donation. There's layering of our funding agreements, not funding, our sponsorships. So it depends on the program. So as an example, you can buy a bench for around $1,000, I think, or maybe the stones are $1,000, and there's a bench program. There are, depending on how much money you sponsor, depends on where you could put your name on things. As an example, the Wildest Dreams, or this year we had the bugs. We had animatronic bugs in the zoo, and we had people that and corporate sponsors that were sponsoring, $5,000 to $10,000 depending on the insect, and some people $500. So there's it depends on what we're asking sponsorships for. I did a conference for the Zoological Horticulture Association, and we had donations or sponsorship from $500 to $5,000. So any support at all really is helpful.
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
I have another question for you, which were there any other organizations or parks that you're modeled after?
Yes, we started our initial modeling. They looked at New York Central Park, at the Conservancy model there. They went out to Vancouver and looked at a couple of different smaller, I believe those ones were arts, like art collaborations or arts conservancies, but basically based on the New York Central Park model, and then modified from that to sort of make a made in Winnipeg perspective. The difference there is I went out to New York last year to take a course on governance and urban park management. And one of the things, the difference is that New York Central Park they don't run their own restaurants. They lease that space out, and they don't run their own zoo. So they lease that space out. And so they get a percentage of the income from the city of New York, but they don't get 100% of the income from the city of New York. So their cost to run the space is slightly different than ours, and their income, of course, is different than ours from that perspective. And so it was interesting talking to, I spent some time at the opportunity and very blessed to have some time with the chief financial officer and ask them about where do you go from here. You set up the Conservancy, I believe they're just 30 years old or 20 and change. How do you maintain that over time? You obviously, his one comment was, the people's backyard that New York sits on is pretty important to those people, but education and outreach is the next place that they're going, and that's one of the things that we're looking at too, is how do we take the skill sets that we have within the park out to other parks. So New York has set up a program where they're going to other boroughs and they're teaching people how to do sustainable park management, and that's kind of, I think, a good way for us to look at that too, is where do you go from here?
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
I have another question for you that's about, does your group have a relationship with the First Nations communities in the area?
Yes, we do, and we have people on our board that are First Nations, and we also, in particular with the Indigenous Peoples Garden, we have staff that are First Nations. We have a program, the cultural awareness, that has been very, very interesting to staff, but also to the general public, to be able to come down and learn more about the culture of the First Nations. The Indigenous Peoples Garden, the people who are designing it are First Nations. There will be community builds. The planting of it will be done by First Nations, and it's a hugely important connection. It's we're all people, and that idea of you can't just call in come in and say this is my land. I don't want to get into that too deeply, but yes, we do have Indigenous people as part of our team.
Thanks, Karen.
You're welcome.
I have a couple of questions that are very specific around operations. So one is, how are the restaurants operated?
So we have one restaurant that is open, it's a cafe. It opens 8 o'clock in the morning and closes at 4 o'clock. So it's open to the general public until 4 o'clock. And then from 4 o'clock in the evening until afterwards, it is opened up for rentals. That same space has, the restaurant has the capacity to close off 2 rooms. So those rooms could be rented out during the day. We have an event staff and food and beverage staff that look at renting the different spaces. One of the restaurants is in the zoo. There's a big window, so you can sit in the Tundra Cafe and while you're eating your lunch, watch polar bears as part of the exhibit. And so we have a food and beverage department. We also have a catering department that does catering for the evenings, for weddings or for Christmas parties or those types of things. So it's all internal, but we have some Red Seal chefs. Heiko Dirksen just won the gold plate or the silver in the gold plate the other day. So there's some great chefs. We grow a lot of the vegetables and things like that for the restaurants as well. We did what's the name of this? Sauerkraut 2 years ago. We grew in the children's garden, and then they made about, I don't know how many hundreds of pounds of sauerkraut. We grow potatoes in the children's garden that went to Winnipeg Harvest. So yeah, the restaurants are all run internally. We have 3 chefs, a couple of sous chefs, and I don't know the official term for the people who do the baking part. I don't know if they're chefs or if they're dessert people. I'm a gardener. I just remember this is being recorded. How horrible.
It's fine. The bakers.
Yes, the bakers, and they make amazing bake. Yeah.
So I have another question for you, which is around, does the park have a community garden?
We do not have a community garden. Well, I shouldn't say that. We have an herb garden that is run by Herb Society, and we have a garden for the Victoria Order of Nurses and for the transplant garden that are run by volunteers. We don't have a community garden where people can come and grow material in the park and zoo. But we do grow material for other community gardens. So we sent material down to Mama Way and a variety of different places in the inner city. The vegetables, we started them so they had small saplings and seedlings of tomatoes and cucumbers and things like that to support community gardens. But we don't have a community garden within the park. And we grow things within the park for our own use as well.
Thanks, Karen. So I have to tell you that there are more questions, but I'm also very conscious of time at this point. So what we'll do is we'll respond to some of these questions when we send out our follow-up email. So thank you, everyone, for participating. This has been incredible. Wonderful to get all these great questions. I'm just going to share with you the evaluation link in the chat window, and as I mentioned before, we'll send an email in the next few days with the links to the evaluation, to the case study, because we've done a case study on the Conservancy here. And we'll also send you a video recording. And I'd like to say thank you, Karen, for sharing your expertise and your knowledge with us today. It's been wonderful. And thank you for taking all these incredible questions And thank you for everyone who joined us
Oh,
in the webinar. It was
well,
great.
thank you so much, and thank you, park people, for doing this. Parks are super important. Thank you all for taking the time today to hang out. That's awesome. Thank you.
All right, bye.